Have you ever heard the legend of Neo, the child who carried the power of the gods? Born with a curse, abandoned by his own father, shunned by the entire village. Yet in the end, he became the hero who saved them all. But when glory arrives, will Neo choose forgiveness? Or will he walk away, leaving everything behind to follow his destiny? Once upon a time, in the distant land near the thriving African-American communities of Maryland, there existed a small, peaceful village that had stood the test of time. Though it was neither grand nor as developed as the major cities along the East Coast, the village was cherished by its people for preserving many traditional cultural values, a blend of ancestral African heritage and old colonial American customs. Amidst dense forests filled with oak and maple trees, by the banks of a freshwater stream, the villagers often gathered beneath the shade of ancient trees to converse. By day, they diligently farmed, hunted, and fished. By night, under the flickering glow of firelight, they sang folk songs with African melodies and passed down myths and legends of their ancestors. Over time, these stories were told across generations, weaving a rich tapestry of memories that defined the village. During that era, transportation was underdeveloped. To reach the larger cities, people had to traverse thick forests and winding rivers. However, life in the village was generally peaceful. Children laughed and played in lush green meadows, while adults built homes and cultivated crops. The community was united like one big family. Yet, beneath this serenity lay an unwavering belief in the power of the serpent god, a deity believed to possess supreme spiritual energy, protecting those who lived on this land. They believed that the serpent god could read minds, guide souls, ward off evil spirits, and bestow blessings upon the righteous, while bringing misfortune to the wicked. In this setting, there lived a young woman named Zola. In ancient African language, the name Zola, passed down by her grandmother, meant love or pure affection. Zola was a kind-hearted woman, full of compassion and beloved by the villagers. She had deep black eyes that seemed to carry the distant echoes of her African ancestry across the Atlantic. Her long curly black hair was skillfully braided and adorned with colorful beads, an homage to the African culture her family proudly upheld. Her husband, Malik, was a renowned hunter, descended from a lineage that had lived in the village for generations. His father had once been the village chief, holding many sacred teachings about the spiritual connection with the serpent god. Some claimed that the old man believed in an ancient curse. Those who defied the laws of the serpent god would suffer grotesque consequences, possibly giving birth to hybrid beings, half human, half serpent, bringing unimaginable calamities upon their lineage. When Zola became pregnant with their first child, Malik was overjoyed, as he had always dreamed of a large family, passing down the traditions of hunting and survival taught by his ancestors. However, from the moment they discovered the pregnancy, Malik's father, a now aged but still sharp-minded village elder, persistently warned that their bloodline carried a curse. He claimed that unless it was broken, the unborn child might be born with the form of both human and serpent, bringing misfortune upon the entire village. Though Zola and Malik initially dismissed such superstitions, an unspoken fear began to take root in their hearts. As time passed, Zola's pregnancy progressed, but she began experiencing strange nightmares. In her dreams, a giant serpent coiled around her body, terrifying yet oddly familiar. Each time she awoke, she was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding violently, feeling as if the serpent's piercing gaze was waiting for something beyond human understanding. She dared not share these visions with anyone, fearing that it would cause unnecessary panic. However, the repeated nightmares soon led her to doubt. Could her child truly be marked by the serpent god? The first real sign of trouble came when Zola went for a routine prenatal checkup with the village midwife, an elderly woman who had delivered most of the babies in the area. With great care, The midwife placed her ear against Zola's belly, listening to the baby's heartbeat and movements. Suddenly she froze, her face draining of colour. When she finally lifted her head, her voice trembled. I have never heard a heartbeat like this in my life. It is as if two beings are intertwined in one. I do not know what this means, my child, but this baby... She hesitated, her eyes cast downward, a deep worry etched into her aged face. From that moment, Zola's life spiraled into a whirlwind of fear and anxiety. She began hearing the whispers among the villagers. That baby is cursed. Her family will pay the price for defying the gods. The weight of suspicion pressed down on her, making her feel increasingly isolated. Though Malik tried to reassure his wife, even he wrestled with his own conflicting emotions, his love for his unborn child clashing with the deep-rooted fear of the curse. No one could predict what fate awaited them, but one thing was certain: a storm was brewing, ready to shatter their world at any moment. One night, Malik returned home late from a hunting trip. Zola sat by the fire, tears streaming down her face. She had just received shocking news. Her father-in-law, the former village chief, had declared before a gathering of people that the child growing in her womb bore the mark of the half-human, half-serpent. During the village meeting, he raised his voice. This is an omen of doom. If this child is born, disaster will befall our community. The serpent god will unleash his wrath upon us for failing to keep our bloodline pure. At first, some villagers opposed the elder's claims, believing he was just an old man too deeply entrenched in superstition. However, as the rumours spread, many others began to whisper in hushed voices, "It's better to be safe than sorry." Fear crept into the hearts of the people. The elders, who had long heard tales of half-serpent beings, became increasingly terrified. They speculated that the child might grow up to possess a dangerous power, bringing destruction upon them all. When Malik heard the news, he was stunned. Deep down, he had occasionally sensed that there was something unusual about this unborn child, but he had clung to the hope that it was nothing more than a coincidence. Yet this was his child, his own flesh and blood. He could not blindly accept the curse as truth. He loved his wife, but at the same time, he feared that his own lineage would bring about misfortune. That night, neither he nor Zola could sleep. They were forced to confront an agonizing question. Should we keep this baby? Through her tears, Zola clutched Malik's hand tightly. I cannot get rid of our child, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can feel it moving, growing every day. I do not believe that the serpent god would want us to kill an innocent soul. Malik remained silent, his heart torn apart. The flickering firelight illuminated his face, reflecting the war raging within him. Should he stand by his wife and child, or obey his father and abandon them to save himself and his bloodline? Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying an eerie sound, like the slithering of 100 serpents. The branches swayed, rustling in a ghostly whisper. Zola shuddered. Her gaze drifted toward the dark forest, and suddenly, she remembered her nightmare. The colossal serpent coiling around her. She had a foreboding sense that the curse, the prophecy, and the fear consuming them all were connected to something far greater than they could ever comprehend. The confrontation with the village chief. The next morning, Malik took Zola to confront his father. The old village chief sat on a wooden chair outside his worn-down house, gripping a staff carved with the head of a serpent, a symbol of their family's spiritual authority. As soon as he saw his son, his expression darkened. "What do you intend to do?" he demanded, his voice heavy. "I have warned you, this child carries a curse." Malik took a deep breath. "Father, please, don't be so quick to judge. Zola and I will find a way to..." "What way is left?" His father cut him off. The curse has already been cast. The serpent god has warned our ancestors. We must eliminate this threat before it is too late. If not, even you will suffer the consequences. Zola wanted to speak up to defend her child, but her voice failed her. She could feel her body trembling with fear. Malik hesitated, then pleaded with his father, trying to convince him that their child deserved to live. The conversation escalated into an intense argument. The old chief slammed his staff into the ground, glaring at his son. If you choose to stand by this woman, then from this day forward, you are no longer my son. You will fend for yourself. Do not say I did not warn you. The agonizing walk back home. On the way home, Zola walked heavily, her heart shattered. She understood that Malik, like her, was now standing before a terrible choice: abandon their child or lose his father, and perhaps the entire village's support. In that moment, Zola realized a fear far greater than the so-called curse. The fear that her child would be born into a world that would never accept it, a world that would scorn and shun it. But a mother's love is stronger than fear. A fierce determination blazed within her. She would protect her child, no matter the cost. After the intense conflict with his father, Malik was left in a state of unprecedented turmoil. Many nights, he would sneak out of the house, walking along the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness with a heavy heart. If the child is truly born as a half-human, half-serpent, how will I face it? How can I protect it from the cruelty of the world? He wondered. Even he had nightmares, visions of the child transforming into a giant serpent, followed by the haunting cries of pain and anguish. One night he came home late, exhausted. Zola, worried and fearful of losing him, gently asked, "Have you made your decision?" Malik remained silent for a long time before finally whispering, "I cannot fight the curse. Perhaps we should leave. Or maybe I should leave for a while. I'm sorry." Hearing this, Zola collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Malik reached out to hold her, but he could not bring himself to meet her eyes. He confessed that he was not strong enough to stand against his father, the village, and the supernatural forces that might come upon them. "I have to choose, and I don't know what to do," Malik admitted in frustration. "My father has given me an ultimatum. If I keep the child, I must abandon my family. But if I convince you to give it up, I will suffer for the rest of my life." For days, Malik struggled with his inner turmoil. Finally, he told Zola, "I'm leaving. I have failed you and our child." Before she could beg him to stay, he packed a few belongings and walked out the door. Zola, utterly devastated, called out his name in desperation. The door slammed shut. The sound of his heavy footsteps fading into the night felt like 1,000 knives piercing her heart. From that moment on, Malik was gone, a village that whispers and watches. The entire village learned of his departure, and soon the rumors began. Some mocked Zola, saying, "The child was abandoned by its own father before even being born. Surely, it must be a demon's offspring." Others pitied her, casting her sorrowful glances. A few women from poor backgrounds who understood suffering quietly offered her food, a handful of vegetables, a small fish. They said nothing, but their eyes carried a silent sadness. Zola now understood. She had only one choice left: to move forward. A lonely journey towards motherhood. As her belly grew, Zola withdrew from the world. She avoided the villagers, moving with quiet footsteps through the streets. Her health declined. Sleepless nights, aching limbs, the weight of exhaustion pressing upon her. Sometimes she could feel the baby kicking unusually hard, sending a warm pulse running down her spine. She would whisper to herself, "My child, what are you trying to tell me?" To prepare for the birth, Zola sought the help of the village midwife. But even the midwife was uneasy. "I have never delivered a case like this before," the old woman admitted. "You must put your faith in the spirits for protection." And so the village waited, filled with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and anticipation. That night, the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, concealing mysteries yet to be unveiled, as the world held its breath, waiting for a child like no other to take its first cry. Finally, the day of labor arrived. In this region of Maryland, whenever a woman was about to give birth, the villagers would gather at the largest house in the area, lighting fires throughout the night to ward off the cold winds and taking turns to stand guard, protecting the expectant mother from wild animals or any other lurking dangers. That night, thick clouds rolled across the sky. The wind howled through the trees, signaling an impending violent storm. The village midwife, along with a few experienced women, surrounded Zola. She groaned in pain, sweat pouring down her face. Wave after wave of contractions crashed over her, draining every last ounce of strength. Outside, the thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, and just as a loud clap of thunder split the sky, Zola let out a piercing scream, a cry that seemed to shake the very air. At that very moment, a strange, high-pitched sound, like the hiss of a serpent, pierced through the room. The entire gathering shuddered in fear. Then the child's cry echoed through the night. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others let out cries of horror. The newborn was unlike any other. Its lower body bore unusual features: ashen grey skin, smooth and hairless, with tiny, delicate scales forming along the calves. Scattered patches of serpent-like scales appeared across its small body. Its fingernails were slightly sharp, almost clawed. And there, a tail, not too long, but undeniably present. A small, serpent-like appendage extending slightly, rustling softly as it moved. A mother's love in the face of fear. The midwife trembled, whispering words under her breath that no one could fully hear. Then, with a hesitant breath, she gently placed the baby into Zola's arms. Zola froze, staring at her child. She gazed into its dark, piercing eyes that were unlike any other, yet filled with an inexplicable innocence. Despite its unusual form, despite the fear and whispers around her, Zola felt the undeniable bond of a mother and child. In that moment, her heart pounded fiercely, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She clutched her baby tightly, feeling the warmth of its tiny body. Around her, the onlookers reacted with either terror or sympathy. A village that whispers and judges. By dawn, the news had spread like wildfire. Murmurs and whispers rippled through the village. They called the baby cruel names: the child of the devil, the serpent child. Zola, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, dared not step outside. But the midwife, standing firm, defended the baby. This child needs care. No matter what form it takes, it is still human. Yet, many villagers refused to go near, fearing that the curse would spread. A new beginning. Named Neo. Zola named her child Neo, a name meaning a new beginning. To her, Neo was not a curse, but a symbol of hope. A proof that even in the face of scorn and fear, life was meant to move forward. Though fear lingered in her heart, her love for her son was boundless. She vowed to find a cure, or at the very least, a way to help Neo live a normal life. After Neo was born, Zola faced countless difficulties. The lower half of Neo's body gradually showed even more serpent-like traits. His scales thickened, their grey hue spreading further up his legs, while his feet remained underdeveloped, unlike those of normal children. His movements were sluggish and difficult, yet from infancy, Neo rarely cried. Instead, he would emit soft, hissing sounds, occasionally startling those around him. Most notably, he was extremely sensitive to temperature. Zola had to constantly keep him warm, shielding him from drafts to prevent illness. A mother's desperate search for a cure. Despite her growing concern, Zola desperately hoped that Neo could lead a somewhat normal life. Determined, she searched far and wide for healers, clinging to the faint hope of lifting the curse, or at least lessening his serpent-like appearance. This journey lasted months, even years. Her first stop was a healer living on the outskirts of the village, a man renowned for his knowledge of medicinal herbs. After examining Neo, the healer shook his head solemnly. "I have never encountered such a case. This is not an illness, it is a divine mark. I can only prescribe herbal baths to keep him warm and ward off bad winds." Zola refused to give up. She heard rumors of a healer, an African shaman from Georgia, who lived in seclusion near the swamps. Without hesitation, she gathered her belongings, cradled Neo in her arms, and set off on an arduous journey through dense forests. Along the way, she begged strangers for shelter. Some pitied her, a struggling mother on a desperate quest. Others, horrified at the sight of her half-serpent child, turned her away. When she finally stood before the aged shaman, she humbly bowed and pleaded for help. The elderly man studied Neo carefully, tapping lightly on his scales, listening to his heartbeat. Then, he closed his eyes, chanting ancient African incantations. Zola held her breath, watching his every move, praying for a miracle. But in the end, the shaman sighed and shook his head. "This is the will of the serpent god. To undo it would require a great sacrificial ritual, but I lack the power. Go home." Zola was devastated. She wept uncontrollably as she carried Neo back home. A mother's unyielding hope. But a mother's love is relentless. Each time she heard of a shaman, priest, or spiritual leader rumored to possess mystical abilities, she set off once more. She traveled as far as Georgia, even considered making the long journey to Texas, where a community of African descendants was said to practice powerful ancient rituals. But distance, exhaustion, and dwindling resources took their toll. And as time passed, Neo's serpent-like traits only became more pronounced. Neither traditional medicine nor supernatural blessings could alter his fate. A harsh childhood. Eventually, Zola returned home with her son, now 5 years old. By then, Neo's voice had become raspy, and his gait remained slow and awkward. Yet, his piercing eyes radiated intelligence beyond his years. But the villagers had not changed. They mocked him, ostracized him. Curious children chased after him, taunting. "Look at the snake boy! See his tail?" Their laughter echoed in the air. When angered, Neo would hiss, his body coiling instinctively. Terrified, the children would flee, screaming in terror. Even adults whispered cruel rumors. "That boy will bring ruin upon us. One day, he will kill us all." Isolation and resilience. Under immense pressure, Zola withdrew from village life. She ventured out only to gather food, fetch water, then retreated to their small home on the outskirts. There she taught Neo to read and write, shared African folklore, and sang the traditional songs of their ancestors. Neo, despite everything, was deeply fascinated by tales of the serpent god. He spent hours staring at the serpent engravings on their walls, sometimes even mimicking the hiss of a snake. Zola's heart ached. She knew her son was not a monster, yet he was born with an unexplainable connection to a world beyond human comprehension. A life without Malik. With her frail hands, Zola endured, doing everything she could to raise her child. But loneliness crept into her heart. Sometimes she thought of Malik. Where had he gone? Perhaps he had wandered far west to California, seeking a new life among African American communities in the bustling cities. Or maybe he had vanished into the wilderness, too ashamed to face the life he abandoned. But no matter where he was, Zola knew he would never return. She had only one anchor left in this world: Neo. Half human, half serpent, yet the only reason she still had the strength to go on. As time passed, Neo entered adolescence. Every day, he had to endure the scorn of many villagers. At times, the mere sight of Neo walking down the street was enough for someone to shout in disgust, "Stay away from that monster!" Witnessing these moments, Zola's heart ached, but she couldn't protect her son all the time. Neo's isolation. On several occasions, Neo attempted to befriend other children, but they either ignored him coldly or worse, threw stones and sticks at him. Furious, Neo let out a sharp hiss, his body coiling in a swift serpent-like motion, sending the terrified children screaming and running away. Over time, Neo stopped trying to socialize altogether. He withdrew into himself, spending his days wandering along the riverbank or deep in the forest, listening to the birds and gazing at nature. Strangely, he developed an unusual connection with snakes. Whenever he whistled near the river, a water snake would slither onto the shore, as if responding to his call. One day, Zola happened upon him sitting atop a rock, gently stroking the head of a vibrant green snake. She watched in shock as her son whispered to the creature, as though in conversation. A shiver ran down her spine. Though fear crept into her heart, she did not interfere. For she realized that Neo's bond with these creatures was no accident. It was, perhaps, a destined mark bestowed upon him. A growing strength. As Neo grew older, his physique became strong and well-built. The scales covering his lower legs stopped spreading, but they remained a distinct feature that set him apart from others. Despite his lack of social connection, Neo was sharp-witted and highly perceptive. One evening, Zola overheard her son speaking to himself, his gaze fixed upon the crimson hues of the setting sun. "Maybe I really am cursed, but I will never let them look down on me again. I will prove my worth." His eyes burned with pride and defiance. As his mother, Zola rejoiced in her son's resilience. Yet a deep fear still lingered within her. Would the world ever accept him? The accusation that changed everything. The peak of the villagers' rejection came when a dead flock of chickens was discovered, their mangled bodies strewn across the coop. No one knew who was responsible, but accusations immediately fell upon Neo. "It must be him. He's half snake. Who else would bite the chickens?" Despite Zola's desperate pleas, some insisted. The snake blood in him must have driven him to do evil. A village meeting was called, where many demanded that Zola and her son be exiled. A fragile mercy. Thankfully, the village midwife and a few compassionate souls stood up for them. "There is no proof," they argued. They reminded everyone that Zola had dedicated years to teaching the village children, treating the sick with herbal remedies, and aiding the poor. Through this flicker of remaining kindness, Zola and Neo were spared exile. But their punishment was severe. They were forced to live in an old, run-down house on the outskirts of the village, isolated from the community. Their days became a lonely, somber routine. That was until a sudden, unexpected event arrived, one that would change everything. During those years, the lands near the outskirts of Maryland were home to many different communities. Each community managed itself, forming its own watchmen and guards to protect against thieves, wild beasts, and invasions from rival groups. For a long time, Zola's village remained peaceful as the villagers were hardworking and lived in harmony. The invasion. However, one fateful afternoon, a group of young men came running frantically into the village, shouting, "The neighboring village has raided our cornfields. They burned our grain stores and took some of our farmers captive." The news struck like a bolt of lightning. Panic spread quickly. Why would the neighboring village attack them without provocation? Some speculated that their land sat upon a rich underground water source, and its lush forests and fertile soil had sparked jealousy. Others believed it was an old grudge from past generations that had finally erupted. Whatever the reason, the village now faced grave danger. A crisis meeting was called to discuss defensive strategies. A village unprepared for war. The problem was that this village had always been an agricultural community. Few had ever been trained for battle. The only things they had were their unity and their unwavering belief in the serpent god. A group of young men volunteered to stand guard, but their weapons were mere wooden clubs and crude spears. Meanwhile, the enemy village was rumored to harbor bandits armed with guns, knives, and axes, ready to strike at any moment. Fear swept through the villages. Families began hiding their valuables and storing food underground, bracing for an imminent raid. The village midwife urged everyone to pray to the serpent god for protection. Neo's resolve. That night, Zola tried to comfort Neo, but he was no longer a child. At 17, Neo understood the brutal reality of war. If their village fell, his mother would be in grave danger. Clenching his fists, his heart burned with a fierce determination. Though the villagers had rejected him for years, Neo still considered this place his home, the only place where he had received any love at all, however little. He would not stand by and watch it fall. The prophetic dream. That night, Neo had a strange dream. He found himself standing in the middle of a vast, open field, surrounded by countless slithering snakes. Above him, a colossal, shadowy figure coiled like a dragon, emanating an overwhelming supernatural energy. A whispering voice thundered through the air. "Bearer of the serpent's blood, call upon us when the time comes. You are the bridge between the human world and the spirit realm." Neo awoke with a start, his back drenched in sweat. Yet he felt an inexplicable sense of power rising within him. In that moment, he realized the truth. The ability that had once seemed like a curse was in fact his greatest weapon, one that could be used to protect the innocent. The battle begins. Days later, tensions between the two villages escalated. The neighboring village launched an attack, marching in with torches, knives, and clubs. They set fire to crops, pillaged the land, and issued threats. Chaos erupted. The villagers screamed and ran in panic. A small group of young men armed with crude spears attempted to fight back, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Shrieks of terror filled the air. Hiding behind a small hut, Zola clutched Neo tightly, watching in horror. The attackers chased down villagers, laughing cruelly, setting more homes ablaze. Neo's awakening. In that life or death moment, Neo turned to his mother, his eyes filled with determination. "Mother, trust me." Taking a deep breath, he dashed into the battlefield. Flames illuminated the night. Thick smoke curled into the sky. Panicked screams echoed all around. The invaders spotted Neo and sneered. "Look, the monster has come out to play. Let's see what you can do." One of them raised a blade, ready to strike. The serpent's power unleashed. Suddenly, Neo shut his eyes and let out a sharp, piercing hiss. A cold gust swept through the air. Then, from the edge of the forest, countless serpents emerged. Water snakes, pit vipers, green mambas. They slithered forward like an army, summoned by Neo's call. The attackers froze in terror. A moment later, pandemonium broke out. Men dropped their weapons, screaming as the snakes coiled around them. Some collapsed, paralyzed by fear, unable to move. The serpents did not bite or kill, but they formed an impenetrable living barrier, forcing the invaders into retreat. The turning point. This gave the villagers a chance to fight back. They rallied together, tying up the aggressors, recovering some stolen goods, and desperately trying to extinguish the fires. It was as if the serpent god had answered their prayers, granting Neo the divine power to command the snakes. The sight of the half-human, half-serpent boy standing amidst a writhing sea of snakes became an image burned into everyone's memory. The villagers finally understood. The boy they once called a monster was now their savior. The battle rages. On the fight stretched deep into the night. At one point, the enemy reinforced their forces, bringing archers who rained down arrows. Neo diverted the attack, commanding the snakes to scatter and mislead the archers. Though injured, he fought on fiercely. Tears filled the eyes of many villagers. Some wept in shame, realizing how wrong they had been about Neo. The village midwife, trembling, fell to her knees and prayed, "Serpent God, thank you for blessing us with Neo." Victory at dawn. By dawn, both sides were exhausted. The enemy, worn down and surrounded by serpents, realized they could not win. Casualties mounted, and they were forced to retreat, dragging their injured and releasing captives in the process. Some of their warriors, now prisoners, begged for mercy. Finally, the battle came to a halt. As the first rooster crowed, the village stood amidst the smouldering ruins, bathed in the first light of dawn. They knew this was only the beginning of a greater conflict, but for now, they had avoided total destruction. And everyone knew. The one who had saved them was none other than Neo, the half-human, half-serpent child. The return of Malik. After Neo's triumphant victory, news of his feat spread rapidly, not only throughout the village but across Maryland and beyond, reaching southern regions where many African American communities resided. People whispered tales of a serpent-bodied boy who possessed a divine connection to the serpent god, leading an army of snakes to repel the invaders. Many were intrigued and curious, while the villagers, those who had once shunned and mocked Neo, began to change their attitudes. They now looked at him with gratitude, respect, and even a hint of awe. A figure from the past. Just then, a middle-aged man appeared at the village gates. It was Malik, Neo's father, the man who had abandoned him 17 years ago. Upon hearing about the attack on his homeland, Malik also learned of the legendary serpent boy who had saved the village. A deep guilt gnawed at his heart. He longed to see the son he had forsaken. The long-awaited reunion. As Malik stepped into the village, the people watched him with caution. After all, he had once turned his back on Zola. Yet, despite the years, Zola emerged to meet him. The weight of time was evident on her face, but she stood before him, weary yet composed. The reunion was filled with tears. Malik fell to his knees before his wife, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I let fear consume me. I believed in the curse more than in my own family. I was too much of a coward to protect you and our son. Zola remained silent, her heart in turmoil. Her gaze drifted into the distance before she finally spoke. Our son grew up in shame and suffering. For 17 years, where were you? Malik lowered his head, admitting that he had wandered from place to place, from Georgia to Texas, trying to make a living and escape the weight of his guilt. But he never forgot. And when he heard of Neo, he knew he had to return. A son's cold reception. At that moment, Neo approached. Now a tall, commanding young man, he stared at Malik, realizing how much he resembled the man before him. Malik's hands trembled as he reached out. My son. But Neo stepped back, his eyes cold and distant. I don't need you. You abandoned us out of fear. Why have you come back now? Malik froze, his heart twisting in pain. He finally understood. His son could not easily forgive the wounds of the past. Unspoken pain. Zola watched in silence, her eyes filled with unshed tears. The villagers too witnessed the heart-wrenching moment, their own hearts aching. They realized that Neo's resentment wasn't just toward his father, but toward everyone who had once cast him aside as a monster. Neo had become their hero, but the scars of rejection ran deep and no simple apology could ever heal them. Rebuilding and acceptance. Despite the emotional turmoil after the battle, the villagers had no choice but to work together to recover. They repaired their homes, treated the wounded, and restored what was lost. Neo actively participated, guiding people on how to avoid snake bites and helping clean up the ruins. Over time, his presence became familiar, and he was no longer feared but respected. The young men who had once shunned and mocked him now hesitated to approach him, hoping to make amends. At first, Neo remained distant, but gradually he began to open up, because deep inside, he still longed for a place in the community. A reluctant leader. In the evenings, the villagers gathered in the town square, discussing ways to strengthen their defenses and organize night patrols. They refused to be careless, fearing that the neighboring village might attack again. Some elders proposed that Neo join the village council as an advisor in strategy. The idea sparked debate. Some of the older villagers still feared him, but in the end, most agreed that Neo's contributions were undeniable. Zola watched her son earn respect, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. However, Neo rejected the idea of leadership, saying outright, "I don't want to be a savior or a leader. I just want to live peacefully with my mother." Still, he promised to help the village whenever necessary, a vow he made for Zola, the one person who had never abandoned him. A father's regret. Meanwhile, Malik remained in their old family home, trying to reconnect with Neo. But Neo avoided him at every turn. One evening, Malik saw his son sitting by the riverbank, staring at the flowing water, lost in thought. Malik could only watch from a distance, overwhelmed with regret. One night, he finally gathered the courage to place a gentle hand on Neo's shoulder and said softly, "I was wrong. Please, give me a chance." Neo shook his hand off and turned away. "I have no father." His cold gaze cut deep. Malik closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 1,000 needles piercing his heart, a new symbol of power. For now, peace had returned, but the enemy had not given up entirely. They still feared the snakes. The villagers sought alliances with neighboring settlements to fortify their defenses. Meanwhile, Neo became a living symbol, half human, half divine. Even though he never sought this role, the villagers now saw him as a spiritual guardian of their land. Yet Neo remained distant, avoiding the curious stares and whispers of reverence, only emerging when danger called him to action. As time passed, life in the village gradually stabilized. One night, while patrolling the edge of the forest, Neo felt a strange pull deep within him. Following a narrow path, he arrived at the large rock by the stream, the very place where he once spoke to snakes in his childhood. There, standing before him, was Malik's father, the former village elder, now an old man with sunken eyes and silver hair. He had lived in seclusion for years, ever since he was responsible for spreading the fear of the curse. The old man stared at Neo, his voice trembling. "I have waited for you for a long time. The curse, everything, is not what you think." Neo froze in shock. The elder then confessed a shocking truth. "Our bloodline was never cursed, it was all my doing. Long ago, I feared that our lineage would become too powerful. I feared that the serpent god would choose one of my descendants as a leader to guide the village through hardship. I was greedy for power and wanted the people to remain dependent on me, so I created the myth of the curse, to ensure no one would dare approach the true power of the serpent god." Neo's hands clenched into fists, his breath heavy. "You're lying. Then why was I born like this?" The old man let out a bitter laugh. "No, you are not the result of a curse. You are the chosen one. The serpent god selected you. Your blood carries a sacred power, passed down through generations. You were born with a part of the serpent god's essence. It is a blessing, not a curse." Neo's anger flared, and for a moment, he almost lunged at the frail elder. But before he could act, the old man suddenly collapsed, his body weakened by years of solitude. With his final breaths, he whispered, "Listen to me. I was wrong. I never imagined that the village would turn against you like this. And I never thought you would use this power to protect them. Now I am at the end of my life. I only hope you understand this. You are the rebirth of our people's hope, not a monster. Forgive me." With that, the elder took his last breath, right beside the stream, leaving behind only his final words of remorse. Neo sat there stunned, unable to move. His entire life he had carried the burden of a so-called curse, abandoned by his own father, despised by the village. But now he realized he had never been cursed. Instead, he had been gifted with the divine power of the serpent god, entrusted with a sacred mission. The weight of this revelation overwhelmed him. He collapsed onto the ground, his mind spinning in turmoil. A lifetime of deception, a harsh present, and now an uncertain future. Neo found himself standing at the edge of truth and lies, unsure whether to feel joy or rage. After the old village elder's death, Neo returned to the village with a heavy heart. He kept the secret to himself, unsure of how to reveal it. In his mind, questions swirled endlessly. I am the chosen one. But what does that truly mean? What responsibilities must I bear? For many nights, he lay awake, torn between whether to reveal the truth or remain silent. One day, Neo made a decision. He summoned the villagers to the open field outside the village, the very place where he had once called upon the serpents to drive back the invaders. Curious, the villagers gathered. Zola, Malik, the old midwife, and even those who had once scorned him were all present. Standing atop a large stone, Neo's voice rang out with power. I was once the child everyone called cursed, but now I know the truth. The serpent god granted me this form, this power to protect others. This is not a curse. What I have done for this village was not a mere miracle. It was my destiny. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Many villagers lowered their heads in shame, guilt evident in their eyes. Neo continued, but I cannot stay here and play the role of the hero you now praise, because in the past, you were the very ones who cast me aside. I will leave this village. I will go to places where my people need me, where injustice must be fought. I will carry the power of the serpent god to protect the weak. His words sent a wave of sorrow through those with a conscience. Many pleaded for him to stay. Zola sobbed, clinging to her son. You are everything to me. If you leave, how will I live? Neo gently placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but resolute. Mother, I must go. You must stay because the village needs you too. I will return to visit you whenever I can. For a moment, his gaze softened, but his determination remained unwavering. Malik stepped forward, his voice trembling. My son, if you leave, let me go with you. Neo shook his head, his eyes cold and distant. I have no father. Stay here. Protect my mother. That is the only way you can atone for your mistakes. Malik stood frozen, unable to respond. He could only lower his head in silent regret. To everyone's shock, Neo let out a long, piercing whistle. From the edge of the forest, his familiar serpents emerged, slithering toward him. Slowly, he walked alongside them, disappearing down the winding path, heading toward the fiery red horizon of dusk. He never looked back, leaving behind his grieving mother, leaving behind a village full of regret, and then a final twist. As Neo vanished into the distance, a strange sound echoed across the sky. The hissing of serpents, interwoven with the crackling roar of thunder. Some whispered that the serpent god had given Neo a new purpose, that he had become a wanderer, traveling across the land, bringing justice to the oppressed, reconnecting the lost bond between humans and nature. There were rumors of Neo appearing in Georgia, Texas, even as far as California, hunting down those who oppressed his people. Others claimed he was no longer human, but had merged with the spirit of the serpent god, becoming a legend, an eternal guardian, seen only by those in need. Will Neo ever reconnect with his father? What fate awaits the young man, as foretold by the village elder? If you want to find out in part 2, don't forget to leave a comment. A lesson from the story. Sometimes what we perceive as a curse is actually a hidden blessing, if only we embrace it with love and acceptance. And who knows? Perhaps somewhere in the forests, or in the bustling states of Maryland, Georgia, Texas, or California, the faint, mysterious hissing of serpents still lingers in the air. A whisper of the legendary Serpent Boy, who continues his silent vigil, protecting the balance, defending the weak, and ensuring his story lives on forever.